my name is Nigel Smith. I am your moderator for this series of webinars from the Council of Europe on data protection views from Strasbourg. We have a distinguished panel of experts and 4 presentations. At the end of the 4th presentation, you will be able to put your questions directly to the panelists. So please use the Blue Jeans Q&A tool to let us know if you want to ask questions. If you want to, you can put them directly to the experts, or I can put them for you. To begin with, let's go to Patrick Pennings, who is the head of the Department of Information Society here at the Council of Europe, for his introductory remarks. Patrick.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or maybe even good night, I should say to Graham, because in Australia right now it's almost midnight. So welcome to all of you. As you know, we were supposed to have the 40th plenary meeting of Committee of Convention 108, but due to sanitary conditions, we decided to organize these remote sessions for a broader audience. And I see that we're already over 100 attendees, and we're very happy about this. We will have 6 sessions of 3 half days. Today we will focus on evaluation mechanisms, but all other priority topics will be addressed during these 6 sessions. Thank you also to the speakers and the organizers, Graham, Cécile, Jörg, but also thanks to Nigel for moderating this, to Sophie and Bohumila who are behind the screens. And thank you all for having accepted and attending this first session, and welcome to all 6 of them. I'll pass you back to Nigel for the moderation.
Our first speaker is Elizabeth Denham, who is the United Kingdom's Information Commissioner. Her presentation comes to you by way of pre-recorded video.
Firstly, I want to talk about what Convention 108 means to me as a regulator dealing directly with people's data protection concerns. I want then to talk about how Convention 108 and 108 Plus are part of a broader international picture of enhanced privacy rights and protections. And finally, I want to talk about the work that data protection authorities around the world are doing to support that progress. The UK was an original signatory to Convention 108 in 1981, and the ICO was very pleased to see the UK be among the first signatories of the modernized convention in October 2018. Our Domestic Data Protection Act implemented the EU's GDPR, but it also drew on the modernized convention, for instance, around how individual complaints are handled. And the result is a high standard of data protection that encourages consumer trust in how personal data is processed, particularly important in the digital economy. But international instruments like the convention have the opportunity, have the potential to show a greater impact to UK residents than our domestic law. When people open an app on their phone as they walk down the street in Manchester, they expect their data to be protected without having to check where in the world the app developer is based. By improving standards internationally, Convention 108 can be an important tool in my regulatory toolbox. The convention's value increases as its reach grows. And this really reflects a broader international trend towards higher standards. More countries than ever are looking to privacy protections to maximize the opportunities of digital innovation while minimizing the risks. Each law reflects a country's own cultures and outlooks, but Convention 108 has been a strong bridge between these differing systems. And as support for the convention grows, particularly in Latin America and Africa, so its value grows as a common instrument that allows regulators across the world to work together to protect people's data. Convention 108 Plus can strengthen this bridge even further. It strengthens the importance of independent data protection authorities like me and crucially emphasizes regulatory cooperation. By including aspects like transparency, proportionality, accountability, and privacy by design, it also feels very current and very practical. And indeed, all of those areas are central to the work that I've been focused on in recent weeks around the UK's COVID-19 contact tracing plans. 108 Plus can also play a role in further facilitating global data flows through greater safeguards for transfers and effective and proportionate oversight by data protection authorities. What is clear is that 108 Plus must remain current and relevant if it is to be a global standard. The evaluation and follow-up mechanism that you'll be talking about today will have a key role in this. And if the committee can be pragmatic and robust, the mechanism can continue to strengthen the impact of the convention. This focus on raising standards and encouraging cooperation fits neatly alongside the work of the Global Privacy Assembly, which I have the privilege of chairing. The GPA is a group that may be better known under its previous name of International Conference of Data Protection and Privacy Commissioners. It brings together representatives from more than 130 jurisdictions around the world. Our conference in Tirana, Albania last year was one of the most defining in our organization's 40-year history, as we adopted a policy strategy that set out a clear vision for the practical issues and actions that we will turn our collective attention to. And central to that is data protection authorities around the world finding ways to collaborate, whether that's on a policy work or even investigations that reflect a regulatory environment that is increasingly international. And since that conference in October last year, the work has continued, and we see it come to life and come to fruition on a very practical note in the development of an international COVID-19 task force chaired by my good colleague in the Philippines, Raymond Laboro. The challenges that we are setting ourselves, whether at the Council of Europe or the Global Privacy Assembly, are not easy to solve. But the importance of finding solutions is only increasing. And that's the point that I will conclude with today. We are at a watershed moment for data protection. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought just an acceleration in the uptake of digital services that we would otherwise have expected to take 5 years, 10 years. The result is that data is now less about the trail we leave behind us as we go through our lives, and more the medium through which we are living our lives. And that raises the stakes for all of us in the data protection world. Our response must be collaborative. It must be forward-thinking. And it must be international. It's very reassuring to see the agenda for this week's discussions reflect that. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker in this first webinar session is Professor Cécile de TERWANGNE. Professor, you have 10 minutes. I'm not sure if Professor de TERWANGNE is with us.
Yes, I am. Do you hear me?
Indeed. You have
yes.
10 minutes, Professor.
Do you see my slides? Yeah. Are my slides? Yes.
No.
Display.
I'm
okay.
not seeing your slides.
No. You don't see my slides? Oh, wait. You don't see them?
We have a very good image of you, but not
don't
your
you see my
so far.
Oh, come on. I'll try again. Okay. And now.
Maybe we can help from this end.
Is it okay now?
Yes, we see them now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I will talk about the evaluation and follow-up mechanisms that are set up in the Convention 108 Plus, and well, they are deriving from the aim of Convention 108 Plus, which is to ensure a harmonized level of protection individuals with regard to the processing of their data, and then therefore to promote the free flow of data between parties. So there is a clear need to achieve such an aim. There is a clear need to ensure trust between parties. So in view of this need, it is necessary to evaluate, to assess the level of protection that all parties, whether new parties, candidates, or regular parties, whether they satisfy their commitments when becoming party of Convention 108 Plus. So this is why there is this need of evaluation or follow-up mechanism to be set up. So the evaluation mechanism is for candidates to accession, so be there states or international organizations. So before acceding to the convention, Article 4 says that each party shall take the necessary measures to give effect to the provisions set out in this convention and ensure their effective application. And the paragraph says that these measures shall be taken by each party and must be entered into force at the latest at the time of ratification or accession. Be sure that these measures are really taken, effectively taken before the accession. So that's why there is this necessity of an evaluation mechanism to assess the measures taken by the candidate before accessing. In presence of parties, be there states or international organization, then they are parties, and then the Convention 108 Plus as something new in its requirements. It is the follow-up mechanism, because the paragraph 3 of Article 4 says that each party undertakes to allow the Convention Committee to evaluate the effectiveness, the measures it has taken, contribute actively to this evaluation process. So you are evaluated at two times, when you want to become a party, when you are a candidate, and when you are a party afterwards, to be sure that you still remain compliant with your commitments. To focus on the role of the Convention Committee. So, as with the Convention 108, 108 Plus gives a certain role to the convention committee, and a certain role linked to this evaluation or follow-up process. The convention committee is invited to set up evaluation or follow-up groups, working groups, to do the job, in fact, to prepare the job so that the committee will be able to adopt positive or a negative opinion, so relating to the level of protection by a candidate or by a party. And so this opinion will be based on the work done by the working group, the evaluation and follow-up group. Each group, well, there can be different groups, several groups. Each group will include 6 members. These persons will have recognized expertise in the field of data protection, and they will be appointed for 3 years. So they will receive states or international organizations. Yes, they will do this assessment that will lead to a preparatory report that will be sent to the convention to allow to adopt its opinion relating to the level of protection. So this will be, you see that the convention committee has a new role. It wasn't like that in the previous version of the Convention 108. And it's really important because it is linked, as I have said before, it is linked to trust between parties. And trust is necessary to allow free flows of data among parties. Here I have, I show you a small scheme here, diagram, to show you all the different steps of the work of this evaluation or follow-up process. Here is about the evaluation. So for candidates, a questionnaire will be issued and will be sent to the candidates and also put the website of the Council of Europe to allow anyone who wants to contribute to do it. And then the Secretariat of the Convention Committee will receive all the responses and will send them to the evaluation group. The evaluation group will then begin its assessment work. It will examine all the information gathered. It potentially will request additional information if this is necessary. And then it will produce a draft preparatory report and suggesting, possibly suggesting to do a field visit if this is necessary to gather missing information, receive more clarification on certain points, meet certain authorities or groups to receive additional information to be able to draw conclusions. So these conclusions or recommendations will be part of this preparatory report. This report will be submitted to the candidate, well, in a draft version to the candidate, to allow the candidate to comment or to clarify any issue, for example, if necessary. Then this draft preparatory report will be revised, and then it will be in a finalized version. So this will be the preparatory report of the working group, sent to the convention committee to allow it to take an opinion, to issue an opinion on compliance or non-compliance. If needed, an assistance can be given by the committee to help in case of non-compliance. And then the opinion will send to the Committee of Ministers, which is the one to take the decision to allow for application for the candidate to sign the convention. You have the pretty same scenario for the follow-up process. If you see that, I've written evaluation group, but it is follow-up group in this case. But you see pretty the same scheme, which will be followed with these dialogues and at the level of the working group, and then with the convention committee entering into place, playing its role, and then the committee of ministers, which has the last word. The questionnaire, I've just wanted to enlighten you about the content of the questionnaire. There will be information about the general context of the state or the mandate of the international organization. Then the main focus. Professor, yeah.
Perhaps we can pick that up in the Q&A because we are running a little over time. So thank you very much for your presentation. Let me bring in now Professor Graham Greenleaf from Australia. Depending on your point of view, it's either very late or very early for you, Professor. So you have 10 minutes, please.
I'll just get my screen sharing going.
To help things along, perhaps we can share your slides for you from our base here in Strasbourg. Would that be okay?
I think it. No, I think it should be fine now. Is it? Is that working okay?
Yeah, it seems to be working fine.
Good. Well, Cécile has given you an explanation of how the accession and follow-up mechanisms will work. Of course, there's much more detail to be known about those from the various documents. But I'm going to give you the perspective of one NGO, one non-government organisation, the Australian Privacy Foundation.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. Sorry to interrupt, but we don't see your slides. Are you sharing your screen at the moment?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I thought you said you did see them.
Yeah, we did see them, and then they've gone again. Would it be easier for you if we shared them from Strasbourg? You just give us an indication when we should change to the next slide. Would that be easier for you?
Not if I can get them working properly, but
okay.
How is that now?
That's okay, perfect.
Good. So that's okay, is it?
It is, yeah.
Good, thank you. So what I would like to do to start with is just say why it is important to NGOs like the Australian Privacy Foundation to be involved in these Convention 108 plus processes. And I think there's 4 separate reasons that I can identify. First, in the case of an NGO like the Privacy Foundation, we want to ensure that if Australia was interested in being acceding to Convention 108 plus, that it would meet all the requirements of 108 plus before accession. In other words, the accession requirements are an opportunity of leverage for law reform in Australia. So there's a direct interest like that. But then more generally, any NGO has an interest in maximising the strength of the laws of both existing parties to the convention and proposed parties, because the free flow of data obligations under the convention affect all other states that are parties to it. And we don't want data from our citizens going to countries where they're not properly protected. Then thirdly, I could say that existing state parties to the convention may be reluctant to blow the whistle on other states that are not properly living up to their convention obligations because of diplomatic caution and reticence. But NGOs don't have such constraints, so they're able to, as we say, call a spade a spade. And finally, I think all NGOs that are really interested in 108 plus becoming the global privacy treaty in due course have an interest in that treaty having as high a standards as possible. So that's the motivations for NGOs being involved. Now, I'll just give one example of how this has worked out recently. Last year in August, the Australian Privacy Foundation, EPIC from the United States and Privacy International from London put in a joint submission to the Consultative Committee on the May 2019 draft of the mechanism documents that Cécile was discussing, suggesting various strengthenings. And we also participated in the November plenary meeting of the Consultative Committee and put forward our views on those matters there. And we were very pleased to see that at least in half a dozen ways that we thought was significant, the recommendations that we'd made in our submissions and discussions found their way into the current version of the mechanism documents. And some of those things included that we ensured there was observer access to the evaluation and follow-up group preparatory reports. That's the ENF groups noted there. We had additional criteria added to what the ENF group would take into account about significant compliance with convention obligations. Specific mentions were included that NGO reports and submissions would be taken into account. And we had the evaluation criteria strengthened so that it now says it must give particular attention to democracy, democratic institutions and the rule of law and their effect on data protection, so as to help ensure that a data protection law does not become a passport for authoritarian states to accede to the convention. And there were other improvements as well, but not everything we suggested, not surprisingly, was accepted. We had put up a proposal that one observer should be included in each of the evaluation and follow-up groups, but that was not accepted, so it's only state parties that are part of those groups. But overall, it was a very successful exercise from the point of view of the NGOs involved. And so, in conclusion, I'd just like to say that, well, first, NGOs, as a result of these processes, can have greater confidence that the evaluations carried out by the Consultative Committee will result in a high level of compliance by both states acceding and existing parties. The exercise to us was a demonstration of the value of the open processes of Convention 108 and 108 plus, and in that sense they compare quite favourably with other international organisations involved in privacy, such as APEC, the OECD and the European Union. And it, to us, made it clear that it was worth our encouraging privacy specialist groups from other countries, NGOs from other countries, to also apply to be accredited as observers to the Consultative Committee. And perhaps that might also apply to some states that are not yet parties but are interested in acceding to the convention, as some have done already, or their data protection authorities. So I think I'll just stop at that point. Thank you.
Our final speaker for this session is Jörg POLAKIEWICZ, a legal advisor here at the Council of Europe. Jörg, are you with us?
Yes.
You have 10 minutes, please.
Can you hear me?
We can,
fine.
yes.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I first apologize because there was an unforeseen event, but it's the job of the legal advisor to be always on call from the Committee of Ministers. And I had to just go down there for a moment, but all is settled now, and I'm happy to be with you, which brings me back to several years ago when I was working also together with Sophie already, and then Graham was also around at the time about the modernization of Convention 108. And in fact, already at that time, and I found by chance a speech I did in 2011, believe it or not, in Budapest at a data protection conference. And already now there it was argued that the convention lacks a strong follow-up mechanism. And the convention may be very sound in its principles, but there is nobody who really checks that states parties live up to their commitments. And because the committee in the original convention is called also precisely the consultative committee, because it is not a true monitoring mechanism. And this was in fact one of the main objectives also of the modernization, which then was brought about by the adoption of the amending protocol in 2018. And I will just put this a bit in perspective, compare it also to other mechanisms, and make a few points, being the legal advisor also on the legal status of findings of monitoring mechanisms, and also on financing and the participation of the EU. In the Council of Europe, for many years in the past, we made a lot of conventions, but it was only in the last 10, 15 years that monitoring became really very important. And now you have in the Council of Europe quite a number of, practically no major convention has been adopted in the last 10 years without at the same time providing also for monitoring, because it was considered very important. In fact, some argue even there's a trend from standard setting more towards monitoring. And you have very different models of monitoring. And also the TPD, the monitoring in the Convention 108 plus, the Convention Committee is also has special features. Normally in the Council of Europe, you have monitoring very often done by independent experts, but here, and often you have also two organs involved. You have on the one hand experts or independent experts, and on the other hand, you have the Committee of Ministers or a committee of the parties, for example, in the trafficking convention, greater, whereas here in this convention, the original mechanism was maintained and strengthened, having just one committee, which is a committee of representatives of the parties. But at the same time, it will monitor and also address recommendations. What we consider, and this is the only comparable mechanism, maybe in a strict sense, is the Lanzarote Convention, the sexual exploitation of children. But it is, in a sense, also it's not as strong there. It's a rather general thematic monitoring they're doing, whereas in Convention 108, it was felt very important precisely to remedy a defect of the old convention, to have really a strong mechanism that evaluates also the countries, not only when they join, but also later on when they are in the convention. So I'm very happy to see that finally now these steps are taken to also establish and think about this new mechanism. One word maybe on the findings. Of course, this is a treaty body. Their pronouncement or conclusions cannot have the same legal force as the convention itself. But as also the International Law Commission acknowledges, treaty bodies and their pronouncements may give rise or can give rise to subsequent practice by the parties and even agreement on interpretation. And I think what you are doing now in establishing a questionnaire, for example, and then later on in the monitoring will be very important practice. Of course, not state practice in a strict sense, will be treaty body practice. But if followed up, I think it will very much by the states, it will very much shape the understanding of the convention. And so it is a very important function also this, that the treaty bodies can give more flesh to the rather general and sometimes even vague provisions of the convention. A word also on financing. It's also interesting. This was also matter we have neglected in the past. And in fact, the TPD currently is financed by the ordinary budget of the Council of Europe. So only member states pay, and which is in a certain sense not appropriate for a convention which is supposed to be international and which has already many states parties beyond Europe, and this should even be reinforced. So but as I say, it's only the Convention 108 Plus is one of 4 only conventions in the Council of Europe that has a provision which provides for contributions, financial contributions by non-member states to the mechanism. And I can tell you also fresh from the Committee of Ministers, today they revised or amended a resolution. So we have now also a framework which will indicate to the non-member states joining this convention how much their contribution will be. To be very concise, this resolution basically takes into account what the mechanism will cost, and then it's distributed according to a calculation which weighs the countries according to their population and the gross domestic product, GDP. And what in fact today was decided also that sometimes you can come up with very small amounts in particular countries from poorer regions of the world. So there is also will be a minimum contribution of 7,500 euro, but still the amounts involved are very modest. And I think the most important is, of course, that this convention will be worthwhile. It should not be, these very modest amounts should not be deterrent for countries to join. I think what will be important is that this convention will be seen as added value for those countries, that it facilitates cooperation between the parties, but also between data protection authorities. It will be a focal point for networks of experts, exchange of good practices, and of course give credibility to the standards of the convention, that they are not just on paper, but that they are also, parties must demonstrate in practice that they live up to these standards. I think I stop here for 10 minutes or my time is up.
Thank you, Jörg. Don't forget, for those who are following us on Blue Jeans, that you can send in your questions via the Blue Jeans Q&A tool. I have a question for the panelists. Clearly, over this session, over these 6 webinars, we're going to be discussing the added value of this modernised convention. One of the themes that will run through this series is the degree of regulation that is necessary. So, of course, there will be those who believe that the Convention's measures are adequate in this regard. There will be those who prefer a lighter touch. So my question to all of you, all of the panelists, is what makes you confident that this Convention 108 strikes, or 108 plus, strikes the right balance? Can we start with Professor de Terwangne?
So your question is the right balance between yes. Efficiency and Okay, and protection.
Between the right level of regulation and a kind of light touch regulation.
Yeah, in fact, the real strength of this Convention 108 Plus is that as an international convention, it states high-level principles which can be respected in different ways according to, let's say, local approach. But so this is high-level principles, but so you are not as detailed as, for example, the GDPR in EU, which is really too detailed to be international model. So the international model must be at a high level, which is the case of Convention 108 Plus. But 108 Plus includes a bit more not detailed, but not more clear, in fact, clearer principles than the first version. It goes further so that there is really a deep content, especially as regards the rights which are given to the citizens, to the data subjects. They receive a list of rights, really detailed list of rights, which really gives sense to this to this protection. So it is, for me, it is really a really good balance between high-level principles, but with the content, with elements they are really creating the protection.
Professor GREENLEAF, do you want to come in on that point about how we strike the balance between effective regulation and a lighter touch?
Yes, certainly. I would agree with Cécile that one of the characteristics of the principles in Convention 108 Plus is that they are expressed at a reasonably high level of generalisation, which enables different national practices to satisfy them. But therefore, they're open to interpretation as to exactly what they mean. And for that reason, there needs to be quite detailed scrutiny of how states comply with them. And one of the virtues of the consultative committee processes is the openness to the views of many parties on whether particular states are meeting their obligations. So there is that element of flexibility in interpretation, but coupled with detailed scrutiny, that means that the right balance can be reached.
We have a question coming in now from Jean-Philippe Walter, who is the Council of Europe's Data Protection Commissioner. Monsieur Walter, can you hear me? Perhaps I can put his question to our panel. This is for our panelists. I've got a question here from the Council of Europe's Data Protection Commissioner. He asks, without the United States and China as signatories of this convention, does it really fulfill its purpose? Jörg, POLAKIEWICZ, do you want to come in on that one?
Yes. It's a bit a provocative question, I would say. I mean, it's also quite on purpose that we have not countries like China and the US, not yet at least, on board, because the convention, of course, can only be applied within a kind of community of parties that share common values and also common understanding of data protection. In particular, data protection as a fundamental right, and have also comprehensive legislation, which is so far not the case in either China or the US, indeed. I mean, in the US, it seems there are now attempts there have been many attempts already in the past. Some states, I think, have already gone in that way. But it's important to understand the convention does not aim to have the 200 or so countries of the world as parties, but only those that are able and willing and have also the capacity, both legal and also enforcement capacity, to live up to the standards, which, as was said previously, are in some respect generally worded, but still have quite a high standard. And I'm confident that the committee, precisely through its monitoring exercise, will also make sure that these standards are upheld in practice.
Jörg, that was a question from Manuela and not from the Council of Europe's Data Protection Commissioner. So indeed, it was a provocative question. Let me just bring in now Professor Greenleaf. You've written on the prospects for Asian accession to the treaty as part of your work on how far can Convention 108 Plus globalize. Following on from what Jörg POLAKIEWICZ has just told us, what pressures may states be under that could undermine efforts to implement the provisions of this treaty?
Well, there are certainly anti-democratic pressures in quite a few countries, although it would not have been possible for Hong Kong to accede to the convention because it's not a state. The events of today, in which the democratic, partly democratic basis and basis of the rule of law in Hong Kong has been ripped out from under it by the People's Republic of China, would be one of the types of pressures that would stop countries becoming parties to 108. If I may just go back to the previous question that was asked, it might be just worth observing about the United States that in relation to the Berne Convention on Copyright, that convention existed for 100 years before the United States became a party to it and then became one of its most enthusiastic adherents. So I think it's no great problem that Convention 108 has not attracted accession by the United States, because it simply cannot live up to the standards of the convention at this stage. And it is better that Convention 108 accumulates a very large body of parties from the rest of the world, and the United States can eventually come to the party. One other aspect of states in Asia that has become a real problem for accessions from Asia is the requirement in Convention 108 and 108 Plus of an independent data protection authority. And most laws throughout Asia do not have any clear indication of independence, and in fact usually have clauses saying that under some circumstances governments can give general directions to data protection authorities. There's just a different understanding of the role of statutory bodies like data protection authorities through Asia, and that's an impediment there.
Thank you, Professor Greenleaf. We've still got about 11 minutes left in this session, so there's still time for those of you who are following to send your questions in via the Blue Jeans Q&A tool. One has just come in from, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Liz Jenner. This is a question for you, Professor de Terwangne. What happens to the countries which are part of the convention, but afterwards, I'm going to paraphrase that, but after being part of it, they don't effectively respect the convention? I think what she's trying to say in that question, or what is being said, Professor, in that question is, what happens to those countries who accede, sign up to the convention, but then don't respect when it comes to the implementation? What measures can be taken in that situation? Professor de Terwangne, please.
Yeah, well, in fact, there will be at the first stage, there can be a dialogue with at first the working group, and then the convention committee will enter into a dialogue to identify the points of divergence or of non-compliance, and to try to bring the party to the respect, to compliance. But then, if after this dialogue and these, well, yes, this diplomatic work of the committee, if after non-compliance remain, then the committee just gives way to the committee of ministers, and then the committee of ministers can as soon as it is informed about the lack of compliance, could organize high-level visits to on place, and to try to influence, to bring back the sheep to the back to home. And if lack of compliance still remain, then you have at the last possibility is to take measures as possibly it is possible to take some certain measures in the Article 60 of the Vienna Convention. You know, the Convention on the Law of Treaties. In this convention, you have possibilities. You could take measures if a party really doesn't comply with these commitments. You can suspend the operation of Convention 108 14 states, but this could be the last action, and diplomatic action will at first try to bring solution to the problem.
Thank you, Professor. I think finally we do have the Council of Europe's Data Protection Commissioner with us on Blue Jeans. Jean-Philippe Walter, are you there?
Yes. Good afternoon.
You have a question for our... Good afternoon. Bonjour.
Yes.
You have a question for our panelists.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank the four speakers for their excellent presentation. I think that we have a good basis for finalizing the evaluation mechanism quickly. Thank you in particular to Elizabeth and Graham to underline once again the importance of Convention 108 Plus as a global standard to achieve, and presently as the only valuable global treaty on data protection. I have a question for all speakers. Do you see any future synergies between this new mechanism and the one carried out at the level of the EU in the context of an adequacy decision under the GDPR? Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Monsieur Walter. Who wants to take that answer first? Jörg?
I can maybe start, yeah.
Thank you.
It allows me also to link it to the previous question. What is, I think, the main one of the major benefits of the convention for the parties is also precisely that it is based on the idea of what I said before, community of values and also standards, so that the data flow and transfer of data, which are so important in our modern world, interconnected world, that there's a free flow and free transfer of data, because the parties are all presumed to share the same standards and apply the same standards. And of course, if one country then does not implement the convention anymore, data transfers can be simply stopped to such a country. And I think here will be also a very important synergy with the EU, the adequacy regime that is compulsory under the GDPR. And our convention, I think we work very closely with the European Union to ensure that being party to Convention 108 and implementing its standards is a step towards also adequacy in the European Union, and is so that also that there is in fact a kind of synergy between the two regimes. And of course, the more we can demonstrate that our convention ensures effective monitoring and evaluation, the more the EU will also be likely to recognize parties to the convention as adequate. So we have also every interest to ensure this parallelism there.
I'd be happy to make a comment on
Excellent.
this question as well. And that is something in the reverse of the case that Jörg has just outlined, of where EU adequacy, the accession to Convention 108 can assist with EU adequacy. And of course, that's now recognised in recital 105 of the GDPR. But if I recall correctly, it also worked in the opposite direction when Uruguay was the first non-European country to accede to Convention 108. And I think it's right that it was the fact that Uruguay had previously been recognised as adequate by the European Union, and the report from the then Article 29 committee, which went in considerable detail into the strengths of Uruguay's data protection system, made it very easy for the consultative committee to accept the accession of Convention 108 by Uruguay. And so at a practical level, it's capable for there to be possible for there to be a certain amount of work sharing between the European Union and the 108 Plus Consultative Committee.
Thank you, Professor Greenleaf. Let me now go to Professor de Terwangne with our last question. It comes in from Said. He asks, with regards to the adequacy of a third country, how does Convention 108 Plus harmonise interpretation? Also, do you think the EU's essential equivalence benchmark conflicts with the Convention? Professor de Terwangne, are you there?
Yes. In fact, must be said that the new version, the modernized version of Convention 108, has been elaborated, having in mind the question, the issue of consistency with the content of GDPR. It wasn't there yet, but it was preparation. We worked together to be sure that it was consistent. So the principles laid down in the Convention 108 Plus are at a higher level, but are totally in consistency with GDPR, which is more detailed, but it is in line. Both texts are in line. So looking at the compliance with one text, things could be done in parallel with the other one, and there is really it goes in the same direction because the principles are totally consistent. So I don't know whether I have, but I wanted to do this link with these two texts. It's totally consistent. So what the evaluation, the monitoring of one text can be used by the other one because it's different at different levels, but really consistent principles are in these texts.
Thank you, Professor, for your answer. And that will be the final contribution to this Q&A session at the end of this first webinar from the Council of Europe today. A big thank you to the experts for your presentations, to the people who sent in their questions, and also to you for following us here on Blue Jeans. Join us again in a few minutes where we'll be discussing profiling in the AI era, or of course join us tomorrow for day 2 of this Council of Europe webinar series. So thank you and goodbye.